I think if I hear you call me Becky one more time, six-pack, I'm gonna pop your tops. All six of them.
Who are you?
Hey, this is Matt once again. What about another review? This is another PayPal request, this time from Eric. Thank you so much for that. For those interested in requesting any type of reviews or re-reviews or topics or whatever, you do send the request either directly to my PayPal or join my Patreon. Both links are down below in the info box. And this is for a film called Cross of Iron from 1977, which is one of the last films Sam Peckinpah did. Because I believe he did this film, Convoy, and then The Osterman Weekend. Now with Sam Peckinpah, I have seen a couple of his films. The Wild Bunch I didn't mind. I actually didn't mind The Osterman Weekend, which I know there was a lot of problems during the making of that film. Sam Peckinpah's temper and then his health as well. Convoy, there's a lot of problems. And that one, the song is better than the movie. I don't hate Convoy, but part of me is like, just go watch Smoking the Bandit or Cannonball Run or something. So, but I don't hate Convoy, but again, just you can tell there's some issues. But this one, it's the only time Sam Peckinpah did a war movie, because from what I understand, Sam Peckinpah was very much against war, whether World War II, especially apparently the Vietnam War, which that would have been interesting, Sam Peckinpah doing a Vietnam War movie with the way he shoots action and so forth. But that's also one of the reasons why he didn't want to do a war film, really, because he was so against it, and this is very much of an anti-war film. And that even with World War II films, he's like, well, they have that intention, but you still, you're rooting for the good guys to beat the bad guys, the Nazis, which is why he made the lead characters here a German platoon who are fighting mainly Russians. Although even with that, granted, it's still a German platoon with the Nazis and Hitler, but even some of them, in particular James Coburn, the lead, he talks about how he doesn't give a shit. He doesn't give a shit about Hitler. He doesn't give a shit about his ideals. And James Coburn, I like as an actor. He did a really good job with this. He's easily one of my favorite parts of the film. He has a scene where he's like, I hate all officers. Do you know how much I hate this uniform and everything it stands for? And he's telling this to his superiors, which was actually played by James Mason and David Warner. And he's just doing this because he's with these men and he wants to protect these men who's with him. So James Coburn's this guy who goes in with his platoon and he does well. And he's a guy who won't stay down. Meanwhile, this new guy comes in, played by Maximilian Schell, who I remember as the bad guy in the film The Black Hole, that Disney filmed back in the day. And it's like, oh wow, he's here but without his beard, his mustache. So I didn't recognize him at first, but I'm like, oh, I recognize that voice, and I recognize the name of the actor. He's a captain who's come in, and you can tell he hasn't seen much action. When a action scene happens, he stays in the bunker on the phone, and he's there only to get an Iron Cross. That's the only reason he's there. He's been transferred. He wants an Iron Cross that fucking badly. But then you can tell he hasn't had much experience in battles. And I will say that the action scenes have that second Sam Peckinpah feel with the editing and the slow motion. And yeah, remember, this is back in the day. Like nowadays, well, of course, that action scene, slow motion editing, what's the big deal? That was not a normal way to do action scenes back in the day. But Sam Peckinpah, that's the way he did it. And I would not be surprised if you talked to John Woo and he said Sam Peckinpah was an influence for his films. Now, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm fooling myself, but I'm just saying I would not be surprised if you read or looked at interview John Woo. Again, I would not be surprised if Sam Peckinpah was brought up in the conversation. And they're well done, but at the same time you still get this anti-war sentiment throughout the movie. Now granted, I think the movie's a bit too long. It's over 2 hours. I didn't think it needed to be that long, but that's a lot of movies back then. You could say the same thing. I will say though that even with that said, I was still kept interested because I was really intrigued by James Coburn's character. Granted, I don't know. It's funny. They're a German platoon, but when I look at people like James Coburn, I'm like, I don't really get a German vibe with his dialect or his accent. But I don't know. Maybe that was normal back in the day. More history buffs could let me know on that. I mean, James Coburn, he's a German. Or he's just with this German platoon, okay. I mean, it's not as weird, I guess. Well, whatever. I want to say it's Tom Cruise and Valkyrie, but honestly, I don't remember that fucking film, so maybe there was an explanation as to why Tom Cruise had no accent. There probably is, but I don't remember a fucking thing about Valkyrie, other than I didn't like it. Definitely like this more than that. But when the actions happen, like I said, there's some nicely done slow motion. There's a shitload of explosions throughout the film. You tell that even with this German platoon, there is some morals involved, and the fact of, like, this Russian outpost, they find this young kid, and they don't execute him. Even when they bring him back, Maximilian Schell's like, you need to execute this prisoner. We don't take prisoners. They're like, okay, we'll do it, and then they don't do it. And then James Coburn actually lets the boy go. And he has a nice little speech before then where he talks about how, this is all an accident. An accident of hands or others. One extreme to another. And nothing works. Neither works. They'll never work. We stand in the middle of no man's land, you and I. You go home, boy. You go home. That's not exactly how he says it. But like I said, James Coburn's character, I was really intrigued by. Because this is a guy who's with the German outpost. He's with these German officers. But he doesn't believe in what's going on. This is all bullshit. Even he knows, this is all bullshit. I mean, there's a line much later on where David Warner and James Mason are talking. And one goes, what happens when we lose the war? And the other goes, prepare for the next one. So if you haven't done that, this is an anti-war movie, nothing will. And there's some really interesting edits here. Like there's a moment where James Coburn is saving one of his buddies and an explosion hits near him. And he's flying from the explosion, but then it's edited to people he saw die, but then diving into the water and being awakened by a nurse. and you realize it's showing like a montage of him getting better after it, but also still flying from the explosion, but also with people he's seen die. I don't know how to describe it, but again, type of editing that's not the norm for back in the day, which makes it that much more interesting to me. Now, if you're wondering, well, where is the story going? One thing leads to another. When he's hurt, he comes back to his platoon. He realizes Maximilian Schell has taken credit for this battle and for winning this battle, that and doing the stuff that someone else did. And they died from it. And James Coburn saw it, other people saw it, but Maximilian Schell lied so he could get his Iron Cross. And then when James Coburn comes back, he's like, well, why do you care about this thing so much? Just a piece of metal. Here, take it. And Schell gives his explanation as to why it means so much to him. And James Coburn goes, well, tough titty. That's pretty much where he goes, tough shit. I ain't gonna fucking lie. You didn't do this. You didn't deserve it. And so later on, when the platoon is supposed to be pulled back, Schell just doesn't fucking tell them. Hopefully they die behind enemy lines. So then James Coburn and his men have to go back through enemy lines. Now, I'm trying to think like how much do I give away and how much do I not. Because there's some interesting lines of dialogue. Like when this new guy comes in, James Coburn looks at him and goes, you know what, I don't care about the cause, your duty, or whatever. Your duty is to platoon, and your duty is to me. Otherwise, you will get a bayonet up your ass. I thought that was a pretty good line. Some of the action scenes, I mean, this is back in the day when you had real tanks, real explosions, real stuff going on. Obviously no CGI. So it's like, okay, here's a tank going by, let's put fucking mines in the tank, like on the treads of the tank, and blow up. And some really stylistic moments where there's a grenade and James Coburn throws a grenade, and then you have a slow-mo shot of a grenade being flying under the tank in a... And I know this sounds stupid to people, but it was cool seeing that kind of stylistic shot of that nature in an older film. Because again, you just think of that more as something like Michael Bay or someone else would do that kind of shot, or John Woo, I should say. John Woo would do that kind of shot. But you know, it was done back here in the 70s from a guy like Sam Peckinpah. So that was the action scene I keep harping on that they're well done. I think the story made me interested to see what would happen next. And certain side tracks it takes. Like this one time they're trying to get back and they find this all-female Russian station. And one of the new guys, who James Coburn doesn't know, rapes one of the women. And well, one of the women decides to bite the guy's dick off. Which you don't see, you see enough. Like you don't see, it doesn't go over the board with that, doesn't go I spit on your grave, or anything of that. You did enough. James Coburn sees this. He takes all the women, leaves them in the barn to take care of this guy who did this stupid shit. So that's what I mean, like, even though James Coburn is part of the German platoon, he's actually... I could grow to like this guy, like this character. The ending I'm not sure on. You know, the end more into spoilers, starting out spoilers. Because, okay, they're going by, there's friendly fire, because Maximilian Schell gets these guys to fuck them up. And James Coburn fucks up the guy who told these other men to do it because of Schell, and shoots the shit out of them with some nice, squibs and slow motion. But when it gets to Maximilian Schell, I'm kind of waiting for this big showdown, because he is the reason why a lot of his men are dead. But then he's like, oh. But then part of me is like, he shot the shit out of this one guy. He should really shoot the shit out of Maximilian Schell, or beat the fuck out of him, or torture him, or something to get back, like, because of his anger and his hatred of what's going on, and his anger for a lot of his men dying. You know, again, he took it out on this one guy, shoot the shit out of him. But he did it because of Maximilian Schell, so I'm thinking, okay, now he's really going to get even more of a comeuppance. And he really doesn't, and that's kind of like, I don't really agree with that choice. But then the other half of my brain is going, I get what they're doing, because he looks at Maximilian and he goes, you know, this guy's so obsessed with the Iron Cross, and he says a line like, let me show you where the crosses go. Like, no, what was the line? Let me show you where the Iron Crosses grow. And he takes him out into battle, which is what this guy's been fearing the whole time. And I will admit, I did like the moment where this one younger kid of the opposition is shooting the shit out of Maximilian, and Maximilian's avoiding it, and he cannot reload, and he does not know how to reload his gun. And he's begging the James Coburn, please, how do you reload this? While this kid's shooting, and then he's out of bullets. And James Coburn just watches, and he just laughs. Just laughs. And that's when the movie ends. And part of me's like, okay, well, what happened with James Coburn? Did he... I mean, he didn't die, obviously, but... I get why it ended that way. Because bringing the fear to Maximilian of, hey, you wanted this battle so badly, you don't fucking fight it. I guess I wanted even more of a comeuppance from Maximilian. Like to go a bit further, and he can't reload, and then he gets shot. Whether shot and dies a slow death, or shot in the head. Again, just my cup of tea would have been more in that direction. But again, I kind of get what they were going with as well, so I'm a bit 50-50 on the finale, or I should say the final end part. Part of me understands it, deals with other parts like, I don't know. Maybe I have to think about it some more. But I would say if you're into World War II movies and you haven't seen this film, it's definitely worth a look. I mean, apparently this film was a big bomb when it came out, and people thought, oh, Sam Peckinpah doing a war movie is going to be this big hit, and it wasn't. But for a film that didn't do well and critics took a shit on it, it's not nearly that bad. Again, for World War II films, I thought this was a pretty decent flick, and you know, if you look at the action scenes, they're well done, very well handled. Characters, David Warner, James Mason don't have a lot to do other than, you know, they're the superiors. Every once in a while, talks to people on the phone or give orders. James Coburn's definitely the most interesting. I couldn't really say I gave much of a shit about his platoon. It was more indifference. Like, the people under his command, James Coburn's command, I really didn't get a sense of their characters too much. Part of me wonders if that's a good or a bad thing. Maybe it's a good thing because it did concentrate more on James Coburn, which I was most interested in. But then because of that, when his men started dying, it's like, I feel more bad for James Coburn than those actual characters dying. So I don't know if you... But then part of me is like, do I want more build up on them? Part of me is like, yes I do, so that I get a bit more into their character, a bit more care when they die. But then part of me is like, well, that'll make a longer running time, and do I want that as well? So I don't know, it's a catch-22, I guess. But I'm just saying, like, other than James Coburn, I won't say the other characters, again, I'm very indifferent on. I get why Sam Peckinpah did this, but at the very beginning and very end of the movie, he shows real pictures of World War II, He's very adamant on his anti-war. I don't think you needed that. Like, I get why he did that, but at the same time, I didn't need to see that. I think the movie itself told enough of how war sucks. You didn't need the extra, let me really show you how it sucks. Here's pictures from the war. So when the end credits started, I started seeing those pictures. I just shut it off. I mean, granted, it's the end credits, so that's, in a way, that's fine, because most people don't watch the end credits. But I'm like watching it a little bit. I'm like, oh, okay, I don't need to see that. I'm watching a movie, not a documentary. Again, your movie itself told the story, Sam Peckinpah. You didn't need. I did it. You did ease up a bit. So I didn't feel that was necessary for those real pictures. But I don't really have a lot of issues with it. Overall, I did like the film. I did like it for what it is. And it's a Sam Peckinpah film that really no one talks about. And I definitely say it's better than Convoy. It was more interesting than Convoy. I did like the Osterman Weekend. I'll be honest, I like this more than Straw Dogs. I was never a fan of Straw Dogs. I like Dustin Hoffman, but the movie itself... Honestly, if I want to see that done better, for me, it's the Hills of Eyes remake. Like, the third act of the Hills of Eyes remake is by Straw Dogs. I mean, he even gets the look of Dustin Hoffman's Straw Dogs with the glasses and broken, and that's more my Straw Dogs, but yeah. A lot of people love Straw Dogs. I prefer something like this, or the Osterman Weekend. That's just me, though. Or even the Wild Bunch I would put over Straw Dogs. Could never get into that one. That's why when the remake came out, I didn't really get into that one either, because I didn't get into the original. Although I put the original better because I don't mind James Marsden, but I do think Dustin Hoffman's a better actor. But anyway, it's a different thing. But Circle of Iron seemed like the artillery, the tanks, the costumes seemed fit, and apparently very true to how it was back in the day. So, seemed like they did a good job on the technical note. Like I said, there's some really good pieces of editing throughout the film. The action scenes, critics at the time said they were confused. Just they haven't, well, those same critics, they should go watch a Taken sequel. Or a movie directed by Olivier Mediton. Or go watch A Good Day to Die Hard. You want to see some confusing editing. Go watch A Good Day to Die Hard. Go watch Taken 2 or Taken 3. Or a shitty direct-to-video Steven Seagal film. You want to see some confusing fucking editing of action. This was perfectly fine with me. So, Circle of Iron, I did like. It was interesting. So I would say, again, if you're into... And this is coming to a guy that a bit worn out of World War II films. But, this was actually pretty decent. Sam Peckinpah's direction is a big reason for that, as well as James Coburn's performance. And like I said, some of the dialogue he was given. Pretty interesting character that he played, at least to me. So thanks for watching. We'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.